My name's Babu Karkor. I actually come from West Africa, the Gambia. I work for our national water and electricity company called NAWEC. I actually came across Humanitarian Global in the internet, and I was really interested when I found they could do some training on water sanitation and hygiene. Actually, I was pleasantly surprised because when I came here, the training material, the lecture guide and everything was extremely beyond my expectation, although it was very intensive and very, very tough. So every day I have to do a homework, which was really not easy. Closing at 5 o'clock and having to follow up with a homework wasn't very easy, but I think we have conquered it, and I am grateful. My expectations were met beyond imagination. The training was really detailed. The material and content were really wonderful, and I think everything was beyond my expectation. I've been given material, I've been given guidelines, and even this institution is trying to link me with people internationally who are interested in and doing what I am interested in doing also. My connection actually started when I flew into Kenya around 1 o'clock late at night. I found people of Humanitarian Global at the airport. These people were able to meet me at the airport, pick me up, and made me settle down late that night. And from there, I think it was just like a family. You know, everything went well. I really felt like home from home. Nairobi, frankly speaking, I can see Kenyan people are a very agitated people. They want to drive for development too much. But my advice to Kenyan people is Kenya is a beautiful country. You've got good education system. Your country is developing, and I can see a lot of young, talented people in Kenya. I think you have to at least minimize your aggressiveness. You are getting there. Advice is, frankly speaking, at Humanitarian Global, if you come to train with them, you really expect to have value for your money. The course facilitators are wonderfully landed. They will give you both the guidance, the information you might need with relevance, and they can even help connect you to other professionals there in the world. Thank you. I am pleasantly surprised that I could discover such wonderful knowledge in Kenya. I can't be but very grateful. And I don't think you guys owe me anything. Maybe I owe to come back again. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning from Nairobi, Kenya. It's exactly 5 minutes past 11, and we are going to start. Glad to have you all here. My name is Eric. I will be your moderator for the session today. This session is brought to you by Humanitarian Global, and with me, I have two people I'd like to introduce. The first one being Anthony, who is the operations manager and academic registrar here at Humanitarian Global. So Anthony, I'd like to invite you to just give a small introduction before we move to our next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Eric, for that wonderful introduction. So my name is Anthony Mkuhi, once again, the academic registrar at Humanitarian Global. Sorry, very much excited to be hosting this session today so that we can have a look at the theme of the day, which we are trying to focus on the aspect of food security and nutrition in emergencies. So we have a packed session for this, and Irene, she'll be taking us through in a short while. Before that, I would like just to give you a brief introduction on who we are as a Humanitarian Global, what we do. And this is an organization that is based here in Nairobi, Kenya, with our main focus being to work with professionals like you, especially from the humanitarian setting and also the development sector in capacity building. So that is our main area of focus. And we offer a wide range of areas that we focus on when it comes to courses and training. And some of these areas, as you can see on my screen, we make sure that we can train you on among the food security and nutrition in emergencies area, which is the theme of today. We also make sure that we can train you on monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning, that is MIL. We also do train you on water sanitation and hygiene, that is WASH. We also train you on disaster risk reduction and management, procurement and supply chain management, human nutrition and dietetics, maternal, infant, and young child nutrition, public health, project planning and management, gender-based violence, data analysis, child protection, and also climate change, without forgetting one of the most important aspects when it comes to humanitarian work, and that is on humanitarian principles and essentials. So those are some among the many areas that we train on, and we make sure that through the infrastructure that we have, we can offer these programs to you online through our e-learning infrastructure. We also organize for on-site training, and you can always reach out to us so that you can come and train with us. So here, and this is just a brief overview, very many programs. We've been able to train very many participants. Now it's over 1,700 participants who've managed to train with us so far. And we have more than 30 training experts in different areas, and more than 30 training programs on different aspects as well, as I mentioned. And we also make sure that we can provide you with the networking. So as you come and train with us, we give you the chance to network with other professionals in your field. And this helps in making sure that it's more than learning. You also get to have the chance for you to network. So very many perks and benefits for you to choose and come and train with us. So that is just among the one of the very many areas that we focus on. So apart from training and learning, we also make sure that we can provide consultancy services to you. So you might be working on a project, your organization might be working on a certain project. So we make sure that we can always get to work with you in that capacity. So that means in case you have a query, you'd want to engage with one of our, if you'd like to engage with one of our professionals, experts, you can always reach out to us. Yeah, so thank you. And I'll be coming back to you towards the end of the session. So back to you, Eric, and I hope you can get my audio. So back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Anthony, for that introduction concerning Humanitarian Global. Next person is our key speaker of the day, Madam Irene. Are you there with us, Madam Irene Maregi?
Yes. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you. Can hear you.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Irene Maregi. I am your facilitator for this webinar, and I would like to welcome each and every one of us in this session that we have organized today. I am a trainer and a consultant with Humanitarian Global, and my key area of specialization is nutrition, food security, maternal and infant child nutrition. So today I will be taking you through our topic for today for our webinar. And our topic is on food security. And specifically, we will focus on the food security situation in Africa. And because at Humanitarian Global, we aim to train and to empower the people who work in the humanitarian field, we will also look at how humanitarian organizations play a very key role in ensuring that we can enhance the food security of Africa as a whole. And so we will start with our agenda for today, and we will look at the introduction where we will define food insecurity so that we can understand when we talk about food insecure communities or food insecure countries, what exactly are we talking about? We will also look at the different levels of food security, because as you will see as we progress, is that there are different levels of food security, from the intermediary to the very severe level. And then we look at the regional overview in Africa of the food security and nutrition situation. So you look at the current food security situation, we look at some of the causes of this food insecurity and some of the effects that this food insecurity has had, and continues to have in our continent. Then the third agenda today is to look at the role of the humanitarian sector in food insecurity in Africa. So there are very many humanitarian organizations that we hear about and maybe we even work in, but what role do they really play in contributing to the resolution of the food insecurity crisis? Because it is a crisis that is not really addressed except when it becomes severe. But we will look at how organizations can contribute in the short run when there is an emergency, or even in the long run, to even prevent food insecurity from becoming such a big issue. And then finally, the floor will be open for questions and answer session, and also for contributions. So we will start with introduction. So when we ask ourselves, what is food security? It basically means that all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active life. So food security means that everybody from all social levels of the society, from all levels of economic levels, from the old to the young, to the children, to mothers, all of them, all the time, every day, have access to safe and sufficient food, such that they can maintain a healthy lifestyle and that they can remain active. And now this means that it includes both physical, having the food there physically, and having the economic ability, or what we call the economic access, to meet their dietary needs. So even if there is food physically, but the people are not able to afford the food economically, then these people are food insecure. Or if you have money to purchase food, but there is no food in the market, you are also food insecure. So there has to be both physical and economic access to food. And also the food that is available should ideally meet the preference of the people. So it means that if you go to the market and you want to have a certain cereal, maybe you want to buy maize, and there is no maize, there is a shortage of maize, then that is an indicator of food insecurity, because you're not getting your preference. And then hunger is closely associated with food security or food insecurity. And hunger is defined as an individual level physiological condition that may result from food insecurity. So when we talk about having hungry or undernourished populations, what we mean at the individual level is that these people do not have enough food to sustain their physiological or their bodily functions on a day-to-day basis. So there are different dimensions of food security. And here you can see this representation, which is gotten from FAO, or the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is a branch of the United Nations. And you see that food and nutrition security depends on availability, access, use, and utilization. So in availability, it is affected by crop production, how much crops is being harvested in terms of food crops. Efficient water use, do these people have sufficient water? Is it being used efficiently? Is there drought? Is there shortage of rainfall? And then the stocks, how much food is there in the stores? Did people harvest enough that they were able to even store for the dry season, or is there no stock at all? And then there's also trade, where do people have physical and market access to food? Is there maybe like poor road networks that there is no trade going on, that there's no way for these people to buy or access food? And then in access, it is affected by income. Do these people have the economic ability to be able to buy food? The prices and the markets of that are available to food also affect the access. So is there such high inflation that the prices of food are too high for people to afford? Are the markets accessible? Are they too far? Is there no road network that these people cannot get to the market? And then we also have transfer infrastructure, which ties in together with the market, and then food distribution within the household. So food distribution within the household means that when food is prepared, it is distributed differently to members of the household. So for example, you find that in some cultures or in some instances that the children get fed first, and then the adolescents get fed, and then the adults, and then the mothers will probably have the least share. Or sometimes you find that it's the men who are fed first, and then the children, and then the women. So how food is distributed within the household or within the family also affects access, individual access to food. And then there are gender issues where you find that sometimes some genders are disadvantaged in that somebody cannot get access of, for example, financial resources so that they cannot farm. Some people cannot own land, or you find that there's so much gender inequality in terms of even education or employment that these people are at a disadvantage. Then under use and utilization, there is food and nutrition knowledge. So how much you know about food will affect your choices. So if you do not have enough or sufficient knowledge on the kind of foods you need to eat, then of course it will affect the foods that you choose, the foods you prepare, and ultimately your food security. Then food preparation and nutrition behavior. So you may find that you do have food, but it is prepared in such a way that it does not benefit the person. We have cultural traditions where you find that it's taboo or looked down upon to eat some kind of foods, or you find the culture changing and people are choosing more of the fast foods, the processed foods, that they are completely ignoring the what we call the traditional foods, the whole grains, the arrowroots and things like those. So also cultural traditions and the change in culture also affects the use and the utilization of food. And then the health status of the individual. So a person who is sick and a person who is healthy will utilize food differently, and also their needs are obviously different. Then the hygiene. So if there is improper hygiene and sanitation, and for example, the water that is available for use is not clean or safe, then this will affect the use of the food, because it means that this person is more likely to get sick or get some kind of diseases that will affect their use of food. And then the care opportunities. Care opportunities basically covers all the social services, things like access to hospital, access to education, access to immunization, because if the health of the person is not taken care of, then it ultimately affects how they use food, even their ability to be able to utilize this food. Now, all these factors are affected by a stable supply, risk reduction, and environmental sustainability. So for you to have good availability, access, good use and utilization of food, there has to be a sustained environment, which means that the people are able to produce enough food, they are able to get good water that is safe and clean, that there is risk reduction, that these people are not overly exposed to diseases, that these people have access to good health care, that they can get treatment for diseases so they do not end up being sick. And there's also a stable supply of the food in terms of production, in terms of prices being stable, and also in terms of access, in terms of infrastructure and markets. So we will look briefly at each. So availability is the physical existence of food. And on a national level, food availability is a combination of domestic food production, commercial food imports and exports, food aid, and domestic food stock. On household level, food could be from own production or bought. from the local markets. So at a national level, when we say we do not have food, we look at various factors. How much has been produced domestically or in the country? How much food have we imported or exported? How much food aid have we received? And also, how much domestic food stock or how much food do we have in storage? Access is when all households have enough resources to obtain food in sufficient quantity, quality, and diversity for a nutritious diet. It depends mainly on the amount of household resources and on prices. In addition, it's also a question of the physical, social, and policy environment. So when we talk about people having access to food at the household level, is that these people should be able to have enough resources to either produce their own food and physically have it or be able to buy it. Then use describes the socioeconomic aspects of household food and nutrition security, which is determined by knowledge and habits. Assuming that nutritious food is available and accessible, the household has to determine what food to purchase and how to prepare and allocate it within the household. So use and also biological utilization brings about a different phase of food security, where we not only now think of food being available or being affordable or accessible, but also how people choose the food they eat. So when we are looking at this particular dimension, I want you to think broadly beyond just the availability of food, but also, are these people informed? Do they have enough information or knowledge to make the right food choices so that these people buy food or choose food that is nutritious, food that also contributes to their overall health, food that will, at the end of the day, help them in their day-to-day lives achieve an active lifestyle. Because you can have access to a lot of food, and if you end up choosing food that is not really nutritious, then you find that at the end of the day, you are food insecure to some level, because the food you're choosing is not the right kind of food. You're not using good nutrition knowledge, and you will end up being malnourished. Maybe you will end up overweight, you'll end up getting some lifestyle diseases, and it will not be because you do not have access to food, but because you choose the wrong food. Then biological utilization is the ability of the human body to take food and convert it into energy. So of course, we use food as fuel for our body. So the ability of your body to take the food you give it and to convert it into energy and vitamins and minerals and everything you need is what we are calling the biological utilization of food. Now, there is a dimension we did not see on the chart, and that is stability. So stability of other three dimensions over time. Even if your food intake is adequate today, you're still considered to be food insecure if you have inadequate access to food in a periodic basis, risking a deterioration of your nutrition status. Adverse weather conditions, political instability, or economic factors may have an impact on your food security status. So what we are saying is, over a long period of time, if your access to food is not stable, if you cannot really say that in the next 6, 9, or 12 months, I will still have enough income to be able to buy food, I will still be able to grow enough crops that I can be able to feed myself, then you're still food insecure. So stability looks at it in terms of the long term. If you're able to sustain having food over a long period of time. So there are also different levels of food insecurity. So we have the two main levels is chronic food insecurity and transitory food insecurity. So chronic food insecurity is long-term or persistent. So this is food insecurity where these people do not have food for a long time. Transitory is short-term and it is temporary. And it's occurs when there's a sudden drop in the ability to produce or access enough food to maintain a good nutrition status. So if it is transitory, it is sudden, and then you find that it comes in, maybe there is sudden increase in prices, there is a sudden shortage of food in the market. That is transitory, which means it happened over a short time and it will probably pass. Chronic food insecurity occurs when people are unable to meet their minimum food requirements over a sustained period of time. It results from extended periods of poverty, lack of assets, and inadequate access to productive or financial resources. So if people are experiencing chronic food insecurity, it occurs over an extended period of time, and it mostly gets worse over time as people's coping mechanisms continue to be insufficient. So you find that maybe there has been drought for a few months, and then there is still not enough rainfall in the next season. So you find that over 6 months, 9 months, that these people continuously do not have resources to grow their own food. For transitory, it results from short-term shocks and fluctuations in food availability and food access, including year-to-year variations in domestic food production, food prices, and household incomes. Chronic food insecurity can be overcome with typical long-term development measures, also used to address poverty, such as education or access to productive resources, such as credit. They may also need more direct access to food to enable them to raise their productive capacity. Transitory food insecurity, on the other hand, can be overcome with transitory food Transitory food insecurity is relatively unpredictable and can emerge suddenly, and this makes planning and programming more difficult and requires different capacities and types of interventions, including early warning capacity and safety net programs. So what we are saying is, for chronic food insecurity, you can really predict it because it comes over a long period of time. And therefore, you can put in very good programs in place such that when it starts occurring, you can bring in interventions that will either solve the underlying cause of that food insecurity or even reduce the severity of it. The transitory food insecurity occurs suddenly, so it makes it a bit difficult to foresee and to plan for, but you can also put in place things that we call safety nets that will help the people overcome this transitory food insecurity. Then we look at the severity of food insecurity. So when we are analyzing food insecurity, it is not enough to know the duration of the problem that people are experiencing, but also how intense or severe the impact of the identified problem is on the overall food security and nutrition status. So when we are saying people are food insecure, we don't just look at how long for. Is it chronic? Is it transitory? But we also need to look at how intense it is. How much has it affected their life? And how severe it is. This knowledge will influence the nature, extent, and urgency of the assistance needed by the affected population groups. So unless we understand how much it has affected these people, we will not be able really to help them or to solve their problem. So the IPC is one such classification of severity of food insecurity, and the IPC stands for the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification. And it looks at a range of livelihood needs. And as a result, it comes up with these phases, 5 phases of food insecurity, and they have different indicators. So the first phase is generally food secure, and you can see in our chart, it's represented by the color green. That means that these people are food secure, they have access to food, economically, physically, they are okay. The next phase is chronically food insecure people. These are people who are experiencing food insecurity over an extended period of time. The next phase is acute food and livelihood crisis. So after chronic food insecurity, people have acute food crisis, where now it goes a step further. It's not just chronic anymore, but now it has become a crisis where people are getting even no food for days. Then it becomes really a livelihood crisis. And then the next after that, it becomes a humanitarian emergency, where now livestock is dying, children are dying, such kind of an emergency. And then the last phase, or the most severe phase, is famine or humanitarian catastrophe. Now, this is where you find that now even governments are calling in well-wishers from outside to really help them. When the government, or you find people have declared that now we have a humanitarian catastrophe because of food insecurity, people are dying, there's no water, children are not even surviving, especially the children under 5. You find a lot of them have been diagnosed with severe malnutrition, that even adults do not have even energy. People are dying in very large numbers. It becomes a humanitarian catastrophe. So the indicators for this, if you want to know which phase of food insecurity the community is at, or the people are at, you look at the crude mortality rate, the rate at which people are dying. You look at the malnutrition prevalence, how many people, or what percentage of the population is diagnosed with malnutrition, severe malnutrition, and also moderate malnutrition. Food access or availability. Do these people have physical access to food? Dietary diversity. Do these people have a diversified diet? Or do these people live only on one kind of cereal or one kind of food? Water access or availability. Do these people have access to water? Is water available? Do they have enough rainfall? Do they have stored water? Do they have wells? Do they have access to clean water? And then the coping strategies. Do these people have what we call the safety nets or the coping strategies? Are these people, if they're pastoralists, are they able to get a market for their livelihood where they can sell their livestock and get money to buy food? Or is their livestock also dying off? Do these people have access maybe to credit facilities where they can get some resources to be able to cope? And then livelihood assets. Do these people have farms where they can farm? Do they have domestic animals? Do they have something that can really be sold as an asset, or that can help them get through the food insecurity-based state? We also have the food insecurity experience scale. Now, this scale is also a way to measure the severity of food insecurity. It's just a different parameter from the one we just looked at. So depending on the FIES, or the food insecurity experience scale, we have 4 states. We have uncertainty regarding ability to obtain food. So food security to mild food insecurity is the first phase, depending on this scale. So where people are food insecure, or they are a bit uncertain, tomorrow they might get food, they might not get food. And then the next phase comes on compromising on food quality and variety. And this is moderate food insecurity. So this is where this person has insufficient money or resources for a healthy diet. This person is uncertain about their ability to obtain food. This person has skipped meals or has run out of food occasionally. So this is where now this person is trying to cope, and they are trying to see, what can I do? Maybe I can skip lunch and take breakfast and supper. Or maybe if I skip breakfast and lunch, maybe I can eat dinner. So this is moderate food insecurity, where they have run out of food on occasion, or they have skipped meals so that they can cope. And then we go to the next stage of reducing food quantity, skipping meals, and then the most severe, no food for a day or more. So a person with severe food insecurity has run out of food and gone at least an entire day without eating at times during the year. So according to this food insecurity experience scale, when we say people have severe food insecurity, we mean that these people have totally run out of food. And this person has skipped entire days, gone entire days or even more without really having any food. Now we will look at the Africa region overview of food security and nutrition. So now that we understand a bit of what food security and food insecurity is, what is our situation in our context? So what is the current food security situation in Africa? So while the global prevalence of moderate or severe food insecurity, which is measured using the food insecurity experience scale that you just looked at, has been slowly on the rise since 2014, the estimated increase in 2020 was equal to that of the previous 5 years combined. So what this statement is saying is that as per the latest report of 2021 of the Food and Agriculture Organization by the UN, is that in 2020, the prevalence or the occurrence of food insecurity, both moderate and severe, that happened in 2020 alone was equal to that has been seen in 5 years combined. So 2020 really shows that there was very, very high numbers of food insecure people. Nearly 1 in 3 people in the world did not have access to adequate food in 2020, which is an increase of almost 320 million people in just 1 year. So as we look at this report also, I would like at the back of your mind to also put this in context, in that 2020 was the year that we experienced the COVID outbreak. So because of that, the food insecurity situation in the world got worse. So this is against a background of that 2020 was not just a year like previously seen, but was a year full of challenges where a lot of people really lost their jobs. There was a lot of economic instability. And as we can see that, it reflected really greatly on the number of people who did not have food. In terms of numbers, more than half of the world's undernourished are found in Asia, that is 418 million people, and more than 1/3 in Africa, 282 million. So we are the second continent with the highest burden. We are number 2 with the highest burden of undernourished people. Compared with 2019, about 46 million more people in Africa, 57 million more in Asia, and about 14 million more in Latin America and the Caribbean were affected by hunger in 2020. So as you can see, it's really a huge difference. The burden of food insecurity that we are experiencing, even as just looking at in 2020 compared to the previous years. So in Africa, 1 in 5 people faced hunger in 2020, and the number of hungry people continues to rise. Hunger affects 21% of the population in Africa, compared with 9% in Asia and 9.1% in Latin America and the Caribbean. So even if in terms of the solid numbers in millions, that Africa is the second continent, has the second highest burden of hunger. In terms of percentage to the population, Africa has the highest percentage at 21%, where 1 in 5 people is facing hunger. Conflict, drought, and economic wars triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic are reversing years of progress. So as we know, there has been humanitarian presence in Africa for decades. And there are projects, and there were projects that had really made progress in reversing food insecurity, in ensuring that we stride and make strides towards achieving food security, achieving gender equality, achieving education for all, giving us water solutions and all that. But when COVID-19 happened, some of this progress was reversed because it was due to unavoidable circumstances, as we all remember. So due to that is why we are seeing these numbers really rising. As of 2020, more than 1/3 of the continent's population was undernourished. So when we talk about food security, we cannot fail to talk about nutrition, because if people are food insecure, then their nutrition is affected. So even if 1 in 5 people in Africa face hunger, a lot more than that are undernourished. That is more than 1/3. So more than 1/3 of our entire population is undernourished. In the whole of Africa, 282 million people were experiencing hunger, more than double the proportion of any other region in the world. So we really have a very big food security burden in Africa. Looking more closely at sub-regional differences in Africa, the proportion of the population in Northern Africa affected by hunger in 2020 is 7.1%, which is much smaller compared with almost all sub-regions of Sub-Saharan Africa, except for Southern Africa, which has 10.1%. In the other sub-regions, the prevalence ranges from 18.7% in West Africa to 31.8% in Middle Africa. Conditions are deteriorating across East Africa, where 7.2 million people are at risk of starvation, and another 26.5 million face acute food insecurity. So in Africa, when you look at the sub-regions, according to this report by the Food and Agriculture Organization, their report of 2021, it shows that in 2020, East Africa has the highest percentage and the highest number of people who are affected by food insecurity. And then in Middle Africa, we have 31.8%, in West Africa, 18.7%, in North Africa, 7.1%, and in Southern Africa, we have 10.1%. So it's really a problem that is spread all over the continent. We cannot pinpoint one region and say, well, the highest burden is carried by these, and we do not really have undernourishment or food insecurity in other regions. We find that it is spread all over Africa. A lot of countries are struggling with being able to feed their populations. At least 12.8 million children in the region are acutely malnourished. And this is one of the key indicators of food insecurity, where we look at the malnutrition rates. And if we have more than 10 million children who are acutely malnourished, that is, they have either moderate acute malnutrition or severe acute malnutrition, and they are all under the age of 5 years, then it means we really need to think of how we can improve the situation, because it really shows if our children are that hungry, if our children really do not have good nutrition, then how does the rest of society really look like? And so here we have like a pictorial representation of what we mean. So you can see in this pie chart of the undernourished people, Africa has 282 million. So this is a bit of a repetition of the introduction, but as you can see, it really is a big burden that we have. If we look at numbers, this chart will show you in comparison from the year 2005 to the year 2020, as it was being projected. You will find that in Africa, the numbers are increasing at a very high rate, because in 2005, we had 195 million. In 2020, we have 281.6 million. So as you can see, that is really a big number that has been increasing steadily. So we need to find long-term solutions that will help us reverse this trend. So what causes these huge numbers of food insecure people in Africa? So there are factors that affect the food production and supply. So if you remember, as we were looking at what food insecurity is, we said that one of the dimensions is access. And one of the factors of access is physical access or physical availability. And now that is connected here to food production and supply. So we have low levels of productivity where we are not producing enough food. That a lot of our land in percentage is not under cultivation for food crops, either because there isn't good access to water, so the land is not able to be cultivated, or because there is a lot of rural-urban migration and the concrete jungle, as it is called, is moving out towards our farmlands, or there is a lot of deforestation, and so our ability to be able to depend on rainfall is also going down. But there are low levels of productivity being experienced. There is high production risk and insufficient diversification towards the production of more nutritious foods. So also you find that we keep producing the same things over and over and over again, which might not really be working in our favor, because we need to diversify the foods we produce so that we can have more variety of nutritious foods. Then there's inadequate food handling and storage, where you find that, especially in regions where we depend on the rainfall patterns. So you find that people have really had a bountiful harvest, but because of the weather conditions, and they harvest crops when maybe it's still wet, it's still raining, a lot of food spoils as a result of inadequate food handling. Or you find that there are very poor storage facilities, and people get a very good harvest in one season, but food is inadequately stored and it spoils, so that even when there is a shortage, we really do not have food from the previous harvest. Then we have poor road infrastructure. Now this affects accessibility in terms of taking food from areas that are very highly productive to other areas that might need the food from these other areas. So if we look at our infrastructure, you may find that there are people who need food from one side of the country. The other side of the country has a lot of food, but because of really poor road infrastructure, they are not able to take the food right across to their neighbors. And now that leads to food insecurity. There's limited food preservation capacity, which leads to food losses, especially for highly perishable foods. So you find that even if we are industrialized to some degree, and we are still innovating and coming up with solutions, we still do not have very high capacity to preserve some of these foods, especially the highly perishable foods like the fruits and the vegetables. So we still experience a lot of food losses in Africa, which can really be prevented if we come up with ways of preserving them. Then there's inefficiencies along the food supply chain that drive up the cost of nutritious foods. Now, this is experienced especially where you find that most of our food come from the rural areas. And so because of the food supply chain, there comes the middlemen who increase the cost of this food and leads to inflation, unnecessary inflation. And by the time this food reaches the market, it is really not affordable to a lot of people. Yet, the farmer who produced the food was not paid the same amount of money, or at least a fair amount, when you compare to the amount that it is being sold for. So we can also look at our food supply chains and really see how we can ensure that they do not lead to unnecessary increase in cost of food. And then we look at factors that affect demand of food. So those are factors that affect supply. Now these are factors that affect the demand. So food environments influence consumer behavior. Moreover, the preferences of consumers also represent an important factor driving the cost and affordability and the availability of healthy diets. So our food environment will influence our consumer behavior. Now, this is what it means. Let me use an example. If you live in a city or an urban area where you have access to fresh food markets, but you also have access to a lot of fast food places, you will realize that that affects your consumer behavior, because you will tend to go for the cheaper fast food foods compared to the whole nutritious foods, which are more times more expensive per quantity when you compare to the fast foods. So now this affects the cost of healthy diets, because as we know, if we look at it from a business side, we know simply that the cost of something is determined by the supply and the demand. So if the demand is affected, the cost of this food is affected. So the food environment in our countries is also affecting the cost. If the demand is too high and the supply is low, the cost goes up. If the supply is low, is very high, and the demand is very low, the prices go down. So also our environments are affecting the cost of food. Then rapid rates of urbanization have resulted in more work away and eat away from home habits, with a direct impact on the demand for easy to prepare, highly processed foods or convenience foods that are often energy dense and high in fat, sugar, and or salt. Such foods have also become more widely available and affordable, but do not necessarily contribute to healthy diets. So because of the high rates of urbanization, where a lot of people have migrated to the urban areas, you find that also there's a very high demand for the foods that are easy to prepare. That if you can go to your local supermarket and you find food that will take you 3 minutes to cook, then most people will buy that versus going to the fresh food market and getting vegetables that will take them an hour to prepare. So this urbanization is also affecting our foods, because remember, if the demand for good nutritious food is down, then it also means that the production of these foods will go down because there is no market for them. So you will find that as the demand for healthy foods go down, the production will also be affected, because then the producers or the farmers do not have market for their food. However, consumer demand can also be a positive force. For example, increased demand can also encourage production of nutritious foods, making it more available at a lower cost. So it's two sides of the same coin, where if demand for nutritious food goes up, then it will encourage production. So if we can get also to educate our populations on the importance of these nutritious foods that can be produced locally, then we can also have an impact on their production. Then we also have climate extremes that cause food insecurity. So countries face increasing climate variability and more frequent climate extremes linked in part to climate change. The number of low and middle income countries exposed to climate extremes has steadily been on the rise over the past 20 years. So we cannot talk about food production without mentioning the part that climate change has to play in how the food production has been affected over recent years. So the climate extremes, where we find that there's a longer period of time between rainfall, or when rain comes, then it's causing flooding, or it has become unpredictable such that the farmers are not able to really plant in time or harvest their crops in time, is also really affecting us. And now this is where you find that programs that are teaching farmers other ways of farming without really depending on your climate systems is really important. Because if we can get a way to either harvest water when it rains, so that if there's an extended drought, we have water, or find ways to even irrigate our crops, such that even if there are extreme climate changes, we can still produce our own food, then that would really go a long way. Then we have poverty and inequality, which are important external factors that tend to magnify the negative effects of other drivers. So where there is poverty, you find that it really worsens other factors. So if there is poverty, it worsens the ability of the subsistence farmers to be able to farm. If there is inequality, it really affects also the everything else. Importantly, inequality is related to economic and market drivers in a broader sense that is multidimensional, including inequality in access to resources such as land and water, and basic services such as health, education, etc. Their impacts are felt throughout the food systems and food environments, ultimately affecting the affordability of healthy diets and food security and nutrition outcomes. So if there is inequality and there is poverty, and you find that because somebody is poor, they do not have access to resources, maybe they cannot be able to farm their land, or they cannot be able to put up an irrigation system to be able to farm, then now this makes the situation worse, basically, is what this point is saying. Then we have policies and governance, which include legislation and finance that shape food systems and hence food security and nutrition outcomes. They can be both a positive force or a negative one. For example, food and agricultural policies have the power, either directly or indirectly, to positively affect the availability, access to, and cost of nutritious foods. Policy measures, including food standards, fiscal, labeling, reformulation, public procurement, and marketing policies can also shape healthier food environments. On the other hand, some economic policies may result in an economic slowdown, or governance may trigger conflict. For example, protectionary trade measures and input subsidiary programs tend to protect and incentivize the domestic production of staple foods such as rice and maize, often to the detriment of more nutritious foods such as fruits and vegetables. So the policies and our governance also have a role to play, because if we can have food and agricultural policies that positively influence our food production, that protect the consumers from hikes in prices or from shortages, policies that will help us have more stable food access, then that will really help us solve this food insecurity problem in the long term. Also, some economic policies where you find that people are being encouraged to really grow the staple foods, and there are really no incentives for people growing things like vegetables and fruits, also negatively affect it, because you find that there is little or no diversification in our diet. And then we have conflict. So the number of countries as well as the specific countries experiencing violent conflict has remained fairly stable over the last 10 years, but there has also been a resurgence in the number of violent conflicts, with conflict-related deaths increasing. The number of conflicts that included one-sided state and non-state violence have increased dramatically and have been accompanied by increasing numbers of displaced people. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, the number of refugees and internally displaced persons has increased significantly with the increase in conflicts, nearly doubling from 40 million in 2010 to more than 70 million in 2019 and more than 80 million in 2020. So when there is conflict for one reason or another, you find that people are displaced. And when people are displaced or there is conflict going on, people are not able to continue with their economic activities. So that means that people leave their farms, so food production is affected. People leave their shops, people leave their marketplaces. So the economic impact of it is also felt. And then now it also results in internally displaced people who are now fully dependent on well-wishers and humanitarians because they have fled. So conflict is also impacting the food security situation in Africa. And then we look at the effects of food insecurity in Africa. So there is increased hunger-related deaths and morbidity. So what happens because we are food insecure? What does it do? Does it have any effect? And the answer is a resounding yes, where you find that more people are dying and more people are getting sick as a result of being food insecure or being undernourished. So undernourished people, especially children, are more likely to contract and succumb to disease. According to UNICEF, undernutrition is the underlying cause of up to half of all deaths among children under 5 years and about 20% of all maternal deaths. So you can imagine that up to half of all the children under 5 who die, one of the main contributing factors is that these children were essentially hungry. And 20% of all the women who die either during birth or immediately after birth is because these mothers did not have enough nutrition, which is really sad if you think about it. Then we have deeper poverty. According to the World Bank, high food prices are pushing poor people deeper into poverty across the globe, particularly in countries that import most of their foods and have limited capacity to push. Estimates vary, but there is broad agreement among many groups that millions of people were pushed into poverty in recent years by food price increases. So I was explaining, there is what we call the poverty cycle, where you find that people who are already in poverty already have limited resources. They're already more exposed to diseases and undernutrition. They have more likelihood of being malnourished. They have less likelihood of getting a good education. And therefore you find that they keep going back in circles over generations over that poverty. And it takes really great effort and really key interventions to be able to help these people come out of it. So when there is food insecurity, these people who are already in poverty really struggle and they end up even getting deeper into poverty. There's decline in agricultural productivity. So the majority of poor farmers in developing countries did not benefit from the food price spikes because the higher prices of the higher prices of inputs like fertilizers, seeds, and energy, which prohibited them from farming. Poor subsistence farmers were particularly burdened by higher input prices because they could not benefit from any potential marketable surplus. Other factors that hindered food production in developing countries included export taxes and controls. So also where there is food insecurity, you find that even the farmers are struggling, where just because the food prices went up, it does not really translate into farmers earning more. So you find that the food prices went up, but also the inputs like the fertilizers, the seeds, the cost of packaging also went up. So the farmer bears the burden, so they also do not benefit, and this discourages them from continuing production of agricultural foods. There is increased rural to urban migration. So reduced prices for food means that farmers collect less for crop output. Poor rural inhabitants are increasingly moving to urban areas in search of better economic opportunities, though natural population growth is the predominant cause of urban population growth rather than rural to urban migration. Rural to urban population shifts leave fewer workers to harvest crops, potentially further exacerbating the problem of inconsistent food supplies. So you find that there are more opportunities per se in the urban areas that people seek rather than in the rural areas. So you find that people are more willing to move to the urban areas and do odd jobs and try to improve their economic status than stay in the rural areas and continue to farm or continue to contribute to farming where they are earning very little or even there is no profit at all. Then there is decline in school attendance, where if food is temporarily more expensive or unavailable to families, families might withdraw children from school until the prices decline or until it is more available. If prices remain higher and shortage prolongs for an extended period, children may be permanently removed from school to forage for food or earn extra income. Children who seek extra money are vulnerable to exploitation because they have little or no education and or employable skills. So one of the groups who really feel the effects of food insecurity are children, not just because they are the group that is most vulnerable to malnutrition and diseases, but also the school-going children will also not get an opportunity to go to school. And you see this very clearly when there is instances of famine, where children, the first adjustment that will be made is that the children will stop going to school so that they can help look for food, so that they can help look for water, so that they can drive cattle from one area to another in search of feed. So you find that school attendance really drops, and now this also draws into the cycle where the poor continue being poorer because the circumstances that they find themselves in really put them in a cycle. Because if this child comes from a poor background and this child keeps dropping out of school because of food shortages or because there is drought, then you find that this child will not get a good education. And now their chances of getting out of that cycle of poverty still remain poor. And then we have decline in future learning and earning capacity. So here, when there's food insecurity, it affects really the physical and mental development of children, and this affects their earning and learning capacity in the future, especially because most of them drop out because of sickness, because of lack of food, because they are malnourished, and then there is increases in high risk activities. So these higher risk activities are activities that people undertake to try and cope and to try and find income in other ways that are quote unquote unconventional. So you find high risk activities where people will be more willing to participate in crime so that they can get money to buy food. They'll be more willing to participate in activities like soliciting their bodies or prostitution. They'll be more likely to participate in other unlawful activities or high risk activities just so that they can get money to survive. So in view of all this, in view of what food insecurity is, in view of what causes it, of our situation in Africa, and also of all the effects that food insecurity has, then what role can we play as humanitarians, as people who want to help improve the situation? So how can humanitarian organizations contribute in resolving food insecurities? So humanitarian organizations are key stakeholders in delivering emergency aid and long-term assistance to families and communities affected by food crisis in Africa. So some of the ways they help communities overcome their root causes of hunger and malnutrition include food assistance, including emergency feeding and cash vouchers. We have diagnosis and treatment of maternal and child malnutrition. Then we have activities that improve access to clean water and improved sanitation, which helps prevent water-related diseases and also support crop irrigation. They can also carry out training in improved agriculture techniques to help farmers diversify their livelihoods. They can help carry out land rehabilitation to improve harvests. Farmers and pastoralists are supported in areas including market development, immunizations for livestock and training, and seeds to grow drought-resistant crops. Some humanitarian organizations also help form saving groups, community banks, and provide financial literacy training to help members recover from emergencies and save for future shocks. New business training, equipment, and materials will also help families diversify their incomes so that their assets are protected from drought and adverse weather. Educational support for children will help them stay in school and also better prepare them for the future and help establish generational resilience. They can also train and build the capacity of small-scale farmers to increase production and safely store and market their crops. Then research is also essential to creating a better way to deal with hunger. And these research projects help us to better understand and address the drivers of undernutrition, to improve and expand access to treatment for malnourished children, and to better anticipate hunger crises in the first place. So as the humanitarian community, there is a lot that can be done. And I find it very interesting that some people have the notion that the only thing humanitarian organizations do is come in when people are affected by hunger and give them food or give them water or give them clothes and shelter. But as humanitarians, we know that a lot happens. You train people, you can give them financial literacy, you can help them come up with coping mechanisms and safety nets. You even support the education of these people. So really, as the humanitarian community, there is a lot, and these are just a few examples that we have looked at. There are those who do give the food assistance. There are those who provide water. There are those who provide the medical services, the diagnosis and the treatment. There are those who give business training, and all of those people are really helping to address the underlying causes of food insecurity. Because when we want to address hunger or food insecurity, we really should broaden our minds and think about it outside just feeding hungry people, but also helping these people and giving them capacity and giving them resources to be able to change the situation in the long term. And that is what a lot of humanitarian organizations do and have been doing. So what is also the importance of humanitarian organizations during food security emergencies? Now, when you find that there's a food security emergency or there is a humanitarian crisis, if you remember when we were looking at the severity of food insecurity, so sometimes you find that you are in a crisis and you really cannot start establishing long-term projects because the need that is there is immediate. So you can provide in-kind food aid when local markets are not functioning. If there isn't enough food in the local markets to meet needs, or beneficiaries do not have physical access to markets. So some humanitarian organizations, as we know, they provide food. And this is done if the local markets are not functioning. You may find that there is no even food in those markets, or the markets are non-existent. Maybe these people, the road infrastructure is so poor that the markets are not even functioning. And these people cannot physically access these markets or even financially access these markets. Then the best intervention there is to give them the food. A typical food basket that is given during this food aid can include a grain, a pulse, and oil, which is designed to mirror the local diet as much as possible. So the food aid that is given in most instances, you find, tries to mimic food that is familiar to these people, food that these people find culturally and socially acceptable, so that they do not reject it. Other food interventions during an emergency include cash transfers or cash for work programs to help families in crisis buy food and support local markets, while also enabling them to make their own choices about their most urgent needs. So sometimes, other than giving the people food baskets or in-kind food aid, you can also give this for cash transfers, especially where there is food in the market and the people just need a bit of help to get this food in terms of the economic side of it. So you can either give them cash transfers and work with the local markets, or you can give them cash for work programs where you involve them in building projects, and in turn they get cash or they get food. Humanitarian organizations also in an emergency can provide non-essential items, which we know when there is a crisis are needed, things like shelter, clothing, and emergency medical services, especially when you find populations that have become internally displaced, either due to conflict or due to natural disasters. And that brings me to the end of my presentation today for the webinar. But I would like to point out that something that we should all, or we have all noticed in all this, is that the humanitarian organizations really have a key role to play. And one of the ways that you can really improve your impact where you are as a humanitarian, or even if you're not working but you have interest in the food security situation, is to be able to train and get knowledge and have capacity to be able to make a difference. As we have seen, there is more you can do than just giving food aid. You can come up with programs that will help these people in the long term. And now for you to be able to have the capacity, here at Humanitarian Global, we really want to empower you who is in the field and who is interested in joining us in the humanitarian sector. And we offer some courses that are really specific to this. We offer a wide range of courses, but I'm going to highlight 2 courses that will really empower you and will give you tools and knowledge to help you. If you're already in the humanitarian sector or hoping to join, we have a certificate in food security and nutrition in emergencies, and we have modules. And I will mention our course outline so that you can get to see that we really teach you about what is on the ground and give you skills to help you. So our first module in certificate is Introduction to Food Security and Nutrition. So here we will look at what nutrition is in emergencies, what are the problems that come up in terms of nutrition when there's an emergency, who are the vulnerable groups, and what causes this malnutrition. Our second module in this certificate course highlights nutrition assessment, because as we said, one of the key indicators of food insecurity in the field is the rates of malnutrition. And therefore, for you to be able to say that the rates of malnutrition is at 10% or 12%, you need to be able to have the skill to carry out a nutrition assessment. So we will give you the skills you need to carry out a nutrition assessment during an emergency for individuals and also for the community, which is the community nutrition assessment. We will teach you how to carry out community surveys, how to carry out in-depth research so that you can ascertain the level of nutrition in the community We also have food security assessment. So other than looking at the nutrition status of people, you also need to assess if the community is food secure, where now you can classify the community or the population in one of the two scales that we talked about, the severely food insecure, the humanitarian crisis group. For you to be able to do that, you need to be able to carry out a food security assessment. And then we also look at community mobilization, because as humanitarians, we work together with the community to help them. You do not just step in and do everything for them. You have to mobilize the community, you work with them, and this will help you understand how you can do that so that your program or so that your work has as much impact as possible. And our third module in certificate is on food aid and livelihood support. So here we look at the different kinds of humanitarian assistance that we have. We look at food aid, the various kinds of food aid, how to come up with appropriate food aid items, how to select the groups, how to distribute, how to set up a food aid camp. We look at the livelihood support in emergencies. So we also have programs other than food aid. That is what we are calling the livelihood support, where you support these people beyond giving them food. So we look at all these kinds of programs and also how you can come up with such programs. And then we look at the nutrition information systems. So we act in the humanitarian field based on information. And so here you will learn how to collect information that is timely, that is relevant, that will help you make the right decision when it comes to which kind of program will be best suited for the people. And then also we will look at the humanitarian assistance and standards. So we look at how, as a humanitarian, your role, the standards you should have, and what really guides your practice. And then in diploma, which is the next level after certificate, we have a diploma in food security and nutrition in emergencies with 4 modules. The first module will look at assessment and targeting in emergencies. So you find that when there is a food security emergency, you need to target, or you need to ascertain who needs the most help at a certain point. So we will teach you how to do this targeting. You also look at food availability assessment, where you look at the community and ascertain the food availability. Then you also look at nutrition assessment and nutrition surveillance. So surveillance is done over a long time. Assessment is done at a point in time. So you look at both methods and you will get the skill to understand how you can carry out both an assessment and a continuous surveillance, because as we know, most projects in the humanitarian community last for a period of time. So you will get to know how you can carry out surveillance on your project. And then we look at malnutrition in emergencies. So one of the consequences of food insecurity we saw was malnutrition. So you will look at how you can handle malnutrition in an emergency, how you can do community-based therapeutic care, where you support the community and individuals who are malnourished inside the community. You can support them and help them in that community. And then we have both the outpatient and the inpatient management of malnutrition, because in cases of severe and moderate malnutrition, sometimes you find as humanitarians, we have to manage these cases of malnutrition in a special way because they need really critical care. So we will look at how to manage these patients, both as inpatients and as outpatients. And then we will look at how you can plan a nutrition intervention. So here we look at a step-by-step plan of how you can come up with a nutrition intervention and come up really with an intervention program that can help you solve food insecurity in your community. We will look at how you can carry out nutrition education and communication, because remember, as we said, one of the dimensions of food security is the use and the food utilization. And we said that people need to be educated on the importance of making good food choices. So it's also a role that we need to play, where we need to educate the people on the correct food choices that they should make. And then we look at the emergency nutrition interventions, which is split into 1 and 2 because they are many. So we look at the interventions that happen during the early onset of food insecurity, when it's at its peak, and even interventions that we carry out afterwards in the long term to prevent a recurrence of the same. And then we look at community mobilization in depth here. So as we said also in certificate in diploma, you also have to learn how to involve the community and work with them so that you can be able to have a sustainable and successful program. And then you will look at monitoring and evaluation in nutrition emergencies. So every program and every intervention needs to be monitored and evaluated over time so that you can ascertain if your program is helping people and if it is having the desired impact. So we will train you and give you the skills to be able to do that. And then you will also look at actions to improve food security in the community. In depth, you will look at how you can help the community become more food insecure by teaching them what they can do. And then we look at the challenges in nutrition emergencies, because as humanitarians, especially when we are dealing with food insecurity and emergencies, you find that we experience a lot of challenges in the field. So we will discuss those challenges and we will show you how you can overcome those nutrition challenges in the field as professionals. So this shows you our course where you can start from beginner level and become an expert, okay? And you can join us anytime. Feel free to contact us. You can join anytime. As you can see, we have our contacts there. You can contact us through email. We have also our numbers there. And the certificate course goes for $500. It's for 3 months. And during the 3 months, you will get all the training material you need. You will get to interact with the course facilitator, who is me. So we will interact and we will ensure that at the end of it, you really come out with a lot of knowledge and skill. The diploma level goes for $1,000 and it goes for a duration of 6 months. Today we are offering a discount. If you enroll with us today, you get a 10% discount, because we are really passionate about empowering humanitarian professionals in the field. So you can feel free to join us anytime. You feel free to make any inquiry and we will be here to assist you in any way. So that brings me to the end of my session. And now I welcome your questions, any inquiries, any comments. We are open for discussion.
Thank you so much for that session, Irene. That was a very informative session. And if you go with me over to the Q&A session, Irene, we have a few questions that our participants have sent for you, maybe to try and give them answers. I don't know if you have seen them, Irene, on the Q&A.
Hello.
Hello, Irene.
Yes, I can see on the Q&A session some questions I think I have answered throughout, but Abshir Ali, you're asking if we can share the PowerPoint presentation after the session. That is okay. You have given us your email address. We are going to share. All those people I can see who have been sharing their email address and they'd like the presentation. We are going to share that as well as soon as we can. Okay, so I am going through your questions really quickly. Kindly bear with me for a minute. Yes, I can see all of you who have shared your email. we will be glad to share this presentation with you. As I said, for those who are asking about accessing the course, you can contact us anytime, and we will be able to take you through what you need to start the course, and we will be able to help you start as soon as you're able.
Hi, Eric.
Hello, Anthony.
Oh yeah, sorry. I think since Irene at some point she got disconnected, we lost some questions on the Q&A. So that is what I'm trying to really bring her up to speed. And we have gotten the questions. So allow us to go through the questions, starting with the first one, which is from this guy called Tewadachi Adesa. How do we classify war zone food problems? So that is the first question, which Irene will be responding to. So I'll go just based on the list. I hope you can see the list as well, Eric.
Yeah, I can see the list with the questions.
Yeah, so maybe you can just try to take us through the questions, and then Irene will be able to respond to them, starting with Yadesa.
Yeah, so Irene Yadesa asked, how do we classify war zone food problems?
Yes, thank you for that question. So as we had discussed earlier, or as I had said earlier, there are different skills that have been developed to classify food insecurity. Now, these skills take into consideration, for example, the FIES and the PIES. They take into consideration the food accessibility of people. So there is really no specific food scale that is designed for people in war zones. So we look at food insecurity from the factors that we talked about. If I could take you back for just a minute to answer your question, let me find what I am talking about. So here, if you can see my screen, the severity of food insecurity, the IPC classification, which you said is the integrated food security phase classification, is used, and it really does not take into account if it's a war zone or not. It looks at the indicators of food insecurity in general, in whatever population. So the only thing we look at, we don't look at if it's a conflict or if it's a war zone or if it's drought. The indicators we look at are these, which are listed here: the crude mortality rate, the malnutrition prevalence, food access, dietary diversity, water access, coping strategies, and livelihood assets. So the IPC only looks at that and then classifies food insecurity based on that. So there is really no scale for classifying food insecurity in war zones. We use the scale regardless of whether it's in conflict or not. We will look at the death rates of the people that result from people not having food, dietary diversity, water access, and all these other indicators. And when we use the food insecurity experience scale or the FIES, then here we only look at how the person has been able to cope. Does this person have food? Does this person compromise on their food intake? Does this person miss an entire day without meals, or do they skip meals? So these scales really do not take into consideration if it's a war zone or not. It just simply looks at people's access to food. So it is not circumstantial. So it can be used in any circumstance. Yes, I hope I have answered that question.
Yes, you have, Irene. Yes, you have.
Yes.
And allow me to read you another question here.
Okay.
From Sisiman, who says food security is a dynamic issue. Then what are the food security is a dynamic issue. Then what are the measures that prevent food insecurity, and on what relevant indicators do we have to look after for do we have to look at for a better early intervention?
Okay. So that is a broad question, and basically he's asking how we can ensure food security, because we are focusing on food insecurity. So how we can focus we can attain food security is by looking at what causes it, and then in turn trying to determine how to reverse it. So for example, we said one of the causes of food insecurity is the extreme weather changes, which makes farmers unable to rely on the weather and the rainfall patterns for crop production. So there, when we look at that as a cause, then the solution for that would be to come up with innovative farming strategies that are not dependent on the weather patterns. So now we start thinking of introducing drought-resistant crops. We start thinking of coming up with ways of farming that really make the most use of the resources we have in terms of water and land. We start thinking of drip irrigation. We start thinking of water harvesting. When it comes to also another course that we looked at, we said that there is the supply and food production challenges that we have. So when we look at those challenges, for example, we said that there is low food productivity. So if there is low food productivity, we ask ourselves, okay, this low food productivity is because the farming inputs are very expensive. So then we make farming inputs to be more affordable for the farmer. We encourage farmers to farm nutritious foods. We also encourage the people to make good food choices that are nutritious in comparison to the fast foods. So really the ways in which we can reverse or in which we can prevent food insecurity is really the ways in which we can counter the causes of food insecurity. So when we look at, for example, poor infrastructure as causing food insecurity because it hampers access to markets, then we come in and we say, well, the solution for this is ensuring that we have good infrastructure. When we look at the economic policies and governance, and we see that some economic policies are hurting production, that the economic policies are discouraging farmers, then the solution to that is coming up with good food production policies and agricultural policies that protect the farmer. We come up with policies that ensure that there are no shocks to the system in terms of very high rise of the food prices, or we come up with interventions that seek to cushion the population from these high prices. We also should come up with ways to preserve our foods, because we said a lot of food that is produced end up going to waste because we do not have proper storage facilities. There's a lot of mishandling that happens when people harvest crops or when they're trying to store the crops. So we can also come up with innovative ways of storing our food so that it does not spoil, and of preserving this food. So really, it's a very broad area, and that is actually very interconnected or related with the activities that humanitarian organizations do. Because as I was heading towards the end of my presentation, we looked at the interventions or the role that the humanitarian community plays in food insecurity. So what the humanitarian organizations do and what governments do to be able to reverse this is actually the answer to that question. It is quite broad because there are hundreds of interventions, because they are mostly situation-based. Every situation has a different solution, but those are some of the solutions. Even things like offering training, business training to farmers is also an intervention to help reverse food insecurity. Even giving financial literacy, educating these people and reversing inequality is also an intervention. So there are really many, but I hope I have answered a bit of your question, because I cannot go through them at all, because that would be an entire module of our diploma course. So there are really many. So Eric, I think that question had two parts. So what was the second part, kindly?
Let me look for it, as I had loaded another question. A minute. The other question was, what are the relevant indicators we have to look at for a better early intervention?
Okay, so as I was going through the course outline, there's a module where I mentioned the nutrition information systems. So the nutrition information systems, or the food security information systems, are the systems that are in place, and they are put in place by different governments, and they go from the government or domestic level up to the international level. So there are systems in place that include a lot of indicators where people collect information over time, and they are able to predict the food security situation in the future. So it's a broad system of organized ministries and governments that collect information. So for example, just to give an example, locally, you may find that the Ministry of Agriculture collects information on the amount of rainfall that is there, collects information on the amount of stock that farmers have, collects information on maybe occurrence of pests that are destroying crops. And then the Ministry of Health, on their hand, collects information or monitors the occurrence of diseases, the occurrence of hospital admissions, how many waterborne diseases are there. Then the Ministry of Water, Irrigation, and maybe Fisheries, if that is there in your area, looks at how many people have access to water, how many people are doing water harvesting, how many people do not have access to clean, safe water. So all of this information is collected into a system, and it is analyzed, and it is able to foretell or estimate the occurrence of food insecurity. So there are systems in place, there are monitoring systems in place, but I encourage you to join our course, and then I will teach you all about those systems, because it is a complex system that you need to understand from the ground up. But there are monitoring systems in place, and there are also what we call early warning systems, where if there was insufficient rainfall this season, then professionals and food security experts can analyze and say that as a result of this, the next 5 or 6 months, there'll be food shortage in this and this area. So there are already food systems in place that are already functional, but we would need an entire class for us to look at that in depth. But there are food security systems in place for that.
Thank you for that, Irene.
Yeah.
I can read you another question by Gejo Lackling, who is asking, does inflation have an effect on food security?
Yes, it has a very big effect on food security, because it affects one of the two main, not one of the two of the dimensions of actually three. It affects three of the dimensions of food insecurity. So it affects food accessibility in terms of the economic power to be able to buy food. It also affects food availability, because with inflation there comes shortages. So it also affects availability, and it also affects stability, because when there is inflation, people do not have certainty of being able to afford food in the future. So yes, it has a very high impact. Anything that affects the economic power or the economic resources of an individual affects their food security. Yes?
Yes, Irene, thank you for that. I can read you another question from Christoph, who is asking how the agriculture can help in ending food insecurity in case that many farmers aren't sensitive on agriculture policy in modern mechanisms.
Yeah. So agriculture or the agricultural sector is one of the key solutions to food insecurity, because if we improve food production, then essentially we will be able to solve the physical accessibility of food. Now, one of the challenges that we have, which is already highlighted in that question, is the empowerment of the farmers, whether economically or in terms of knowledge or in terms of input, such as better efficient ways of farming, that is use of machinery, efficient use of land, better methods of farming. So one of the ways we can overcome that is through empowering these farmers, is through educating them, because if they understand that water harvesting is one of the main ways that I can make sure that even if rainfall is late, I can still be able to water my crops, then this farmer will be more willing and able to start harvesting water. If they are aware of the policies that are in place that protect them, then they are able to have better bargaining power, for example, against the middlemen that we talked about that cause these high spikes in food prices. So the solution is educating these farmers and empowering them, going right to those rural areas and coming up with projects. And that is really one of the areas where the humanitarian organizations emphasize on empowering people through knowledge, by educating them. Because when you give people information that helps them, then these people continue to make changes in their lives long after you have gone. So the solution for that is really to educate them, or to come up with projects that avail to them resources so that they are able to afford these machines to farm, so that they are able to afford inputs, that they are able to use better farming methods.
Thank you for that. Also, I can read you another question by Whitney Francis.
Mm-hmm.
In the spirit of teaching the man to fish and not just giving the man fish,
Mm-hmm.
how can the humanitarian organizations, government, as well as general population secure quality food, such that instead of waiting to be given, what is being done to ensure that the people are equipped to guarantee a continuous supply of food to avoid insecurity?
Okay. That is a good question. And it touches on the sustainability of humanitarian programs, I think is what she's asking. So some of the activities that humanitarian organizations do go beyond giving people food. So what we can do, what governments can do, is by addressing the underlying causes of food insecurity. that we look at. When you go through our training, we look at all these causes, the immediate, the intermediary, and the underlying causes. So the underlying causes or the root causes of food insecurity are, when they are addressed, then in the long term, we have a solution. So when, for example, you address poverty, when you come up with programs that will improve the financial power of these people, then you are helping in the long term. When you teach people financial literacy, when you close the gap of inequality, when you provide quality education, when you provide free education so that even the people who are not able to pay for it get quality education, when you provide basic healthcare that is affordable for all people, when you provide or you come up with policies that make it easy for farmers to access resources that they can be able to get credit to improve their farming practices, then you are addressing the root cause. So anything really that addresses the underlying causes of food insecurity are helping the person, as she said, learn how to fish. So other than giving them food, if you teach, for example, farmers, if you teach them how to do irrigation, then they will be able to use that knowledge in the long term. If you give free education to children and they go to school, then you give them better chances of having a better economic state and breaking the cycle of poverty. If you come up with policies that protect the farmers from exploitation by middlemen, and the farmer gets value for the inputs that they actually put in, then you give this farmer power and you empower them in the long run. So any intervention that really addresses any underlying cause of food insecurity is really a long-term solution.
Thank you for that, Irene.
Yeah.
Maybe just a few more questions. Somebody was asking, what is the difference between accessibility and availability?
So accessibility, as you said, is physical ability to be able to get to the food. Okay, so food can be available, but you're not able to get it, either physically or economically. So there might be food in the market, but you cannot get to the market. So you do not have access to it. So food is available, but you're not able to get to it. Or food is there, you can get to the market, but you do not have the money to buy it. So you do not have access to it because of financial reasons. I hope that makes sense. So availability is food being there. Accessibility is being able to get the food, either through the economic side of buying it or through the physical side of being able to go and get.
Yeah, that is well understood. I have a question here from by Andrew Omondi, who asks, what are the legal framework that should be put in place to ensure there is proper food security within the society?
Thank you for that question. That is a broad question that I might not be able to sufficiently answer. Reason being, it involves a lot of stakeholders, and it involves looking at the current situation as is and where we need to go from here. So when we talk about the legal framework, we are talking about governance, right? And we are talking about the government policies that exist. Like Kenya, in our constitution, there are very many agricultural policies. So I am not really well equipped to answer a legal question on the framework that exists in terms of the laws and the policies that are there. But what I know is that the legal framework, the policies and the governance that we have do play a role in food security and food insecurity. So we will have to look at, for example, the legal policies that have been put by the government, for example, on the kind of subsidies farmers can get on their inputs, on the price that farmers can sell their crops at, on the role of middlemen, on the export and imports. So it's really a broad subject that I'm not fully equipped to look at the legal policies of my country at this time, but I will look into it definitely.
Thank you, Irene. Maybe as I'll read you the last two questions, I have a question here by Gabriel. What are the strategies to nutritional approach on acute malnutrition on refugee communities?
Sorry, come again.
What are the strategies to nutritional approach on acute malnutrition on refugee communities?
Okay, so they are asking about refugee communities. I take it those are the internally or externally displaced populations. So there are many nutrition interventions. There are both community-based nutrition interventions, there are inpatient interventions, there are outpatient interventions. Now, to understand all this, I invite you to join our course, because we would have to teach you how to diagnose all of this and how to determine who falls under what category. Because for the community-based nutrition interventions, this is where you have interventions that the community can be able to carry out in the comfort of their homes, where they do not have to keep coming to the hospital or be admitted in the hospital. And now these interventions will differ depending on the degree of malnutrition. So where we have cases of mild malnutrition or moderate malnutrition, and these malnourished individuals do not have any complications, they are able to feed well, there are other programs in place or other livelihood support programs in place, then we assess the situation and determine, okay, this child, for example, can be sent home with a certain food supplement, and they can be able to recover from home. In cases where we have like malnourished children who are under 6 months, or children with moderate malnutrition who have complications, or children with severe acute malnutrition, then we treat them as inpatients. And there is a criteria where you can do the assessment, diagnose that this child has severe acute malnutrition, and you admit them into the inpatient, you monitor them, and all of that. So it depends on the rate of malnutrition, it depends on the severity of malnutrition, and it also depends on the circumstances. So it would take a lot of assessment of that particular case and that particular place. When we talk of the internally displaced populations or the refugees, then that is a special circumstance, in that most likely these people are fully dependent on humanitarian organizations for their food, for their shelter, for everything. So in such circumstances, you may find that now all cases of malnutrition are treated in a food aid center. So that may only be just the difference, that now because it's a refugee population or an IDP population, that we set up a camp or a medical camp where we solely deal with malnutrition, because these people do not have resources at home that can help them deal with it. So that might be the only difference that might happen.
Thank you for that. Then another question from Wilson Nelson. Why does malnutrition in emergencies settings matter?
It matters because they go usually hand in hand. So when there is a food security emergency, or there is an emergency, one of the very first indicators that you will get is that the people become malnourished. And that is because in an emergency situation, people do not have their day-to-day coping strategies. That in an emergency, somebody who had a farm no longer has access to it, maybe. Somebody who had income suddenly has no income. And one of the things that is affected very quickly is the food of these people. Because when you have no income, you have no livelihood, the first basic need that is affected is food, because it is a basic need that we continuously need to look into. So in an emergency situation, the first basic thing that we look at is food, the shelter, the clothing of these people, and their medical needs. So it's one of the really critical things, and it's also an indicator of how severe an emergency is. So if the levels of malnutrition, the global acute malnutrition levels are at something we say like 12%, then that indicates that it's a crisis. So it indicates the severity of the emergency as well. And also the outcome of malnutrition in an emergency is fatal, because these people have no coping mechanism. So you find that malnutrition, when it occurs in emergencies, is really, really concerning, because these are people who do not have money. These are people who do not have farms, who do not have any coping strategies. They might not even have access to healthcare. So if malnutrition occurs in such conditions, then the people are likely to die quickly, especially the children and the elderly and the women. They are likely to die quickly. They are likely to get sick very quickly, which now makes the situation worse. So it's a really key concern in those circumstances.
Thank you. Maybe the last question before we allow our participants maybe to ask questions is, I have a question from Christoph. Sorry, I had answered that question. Sorry. Okay, let me look for. Yeah, we have a question from Francois, who is asking, please, can you explain more how IPC can influence food security?
So IPC is really just a scale. It's really a tool. It's just a tool that we use to assess the severity of food insecurity. So it has no effect on determining food insecurity, whether it occurs or not. It's just a scale to measure how severe food insecurity is.
Okay, thank you for that. I think now we will switch over to where we allow our participants to ask questions. So if you have any question for our speaker, you can kindly raise your hand and we shall unmute your mic and allow you to ask a question. If you have any question, you can raise your hand. We are going to unmute your mic and allow you to ask a question.
Yes, kindly, there's two questions that I can see in the chats as our participants prepare their questions. So there is a question from Alebatu Abebe, who asks, environmental factors are among the reasons for food insecurity in humanitarians, but how do we assess it? So the environment, which is broad, of course affects food insecurity, whether it be the climate or the health environment, the sanitation. So we assess the environment depending on specifically what we are looking at. So if you're looking at the food production, then you will assess for things like access to farming land. You will assess for things like rainfall, access to inputs, the soil, access to knowledge on how to farm. If we are looking at the environment in terms of the health environment or the care environment, then we will look at the access of these people to good, clean, and safe water, their access to healthcare facility, their access to education facilities, all of that. So we assess the environment depending on what specifically we are looking at. So there are different indicators for that, depending on what it is. And then we also have a question from Daniel Ahmad, who asks, I think the most important problem for insecurity are the awareness. Most of the people don't aware the risk of food insecurity. What do you think about the awareness? That is true. There are a lot of people who are not aware of the levels of food insecurity that are there in our continent, even in our own communities. So the only way to increase awareness of anything is to educate the people. So we can come up with education programs, and we can come up with projects, even seminars, even we can facilitate just meetings where we can get the people, we can get stakeholders involved and educate the people and engage the community and make the people aware of how dire the situation is and how we can be able to play a role in reversing it. So the best intervention to counter people not being aware of something is educating them. So that is the one thing we can do that will make a difference.
Thank you for that. I think I can see one hand up. Whitney Francis. Are you there with us, Whitney Francis?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm asking this question from Zimbabwe. Hello?
Go ahead. Yeah, go right ahead.
Yes. Sometime during the presentation, Madam Irene mentioned another cause of food insecurity is the rural to urban migration. So my question is, what then is being done to curb this problem? Because in Zimbabwe, I've turned to notice that there is in rural to urban migration, mostly the elderly are the ones who remain in the rural areas. And in as much as we are developing countries, we are primarily getting most of our food production being farmed in the rural areas. Therefore, the old are incapable to continue maybe cultivating in the farms and ensuring a continued supply of food, which then results in a spiked rate of poverty. So what then can the humanitarian world do? What then can they do to curb this issue of, what is it called? Maybe brain drain in the rural areas that's resulting in food insecurity?
Yes, thank you for your question. And that is really a big challenge that a lot of African nations are facing, where you find that now more and more young and strong people are moving to the city, and therefore there are very few people back in the farm, and we all get most of our food from these farms. So one of the key things we can do is to ensure that we empower the farmers, because one of the reasons that farming is not really enticing to these young people, if we may call it that, is because the amount of inputs that somebody has to give in versus the profit that they get is really discouraging. So when we can come up with policies and we can come up with ways to ensure that the farmer gets a fair trade, that the farmer gets treated fairly, where the inputs they put in will result in actually something that will make a difference in their lives, where the middlemen are not allowed to take advantage of these farmers and inflate prices, and yet they are paying the farmers very little money, is one really of the ways, because I believe, but of course nobody wants to work when there is no reward. So if we can ensure that we come up with policies and we come up with ways to safeguard the farmers, that they get value for what they put out, then more people, I believe, will be encouraged to become farmers. The other way that we can stop or try to negate this migration is by empowering the youth back in the rural areas with the educate them on better ways of making more efficient use of the land they have, so that it becomes more efficient. So if you have 1 acre of land and you're taught how to make use of that land, that you get the maximum profit from it, it will encourage them to stay, because most of the rural farmers are still using old traditional methods that really do not, at the end of the day, become so efficient or utilize the land so well. So if we empower the youth, even before they start migrating from even primary schools or secondary schools, and we start encouraging them to be innovative in the way they farm, and we give them resources, and humanitarian organizations come in and support them in terms of helping them find markets, because if they farm and their farming becomes more efficient, then they need markets so that they do not get a lot of food wastage. If humanitarian organizations come in and find a way to help them add more value to what they are farming, so that they get more money out of it, it will also encourage these people. So there is a lot that can be done by humanitarian organizations, but those are some of the critical things I think we can do. We protect the farmer and ensure that they get a fair trade for the output that they are selling. We can also empower the youth, teach them better ways of farming, more efficient ways, and humanitarian organizations can come in to provide the resources to make farming easier and more efficient, to give them credit facilities, to train them on even financial literacy, to help them know how to manage even that land. That will go a long way in helping them, and also encouraging innovation, because when we encourage the young people to be innovative in agriculture, where somebody can come up with a way of preserving fruits or preserving vegetables, then it will encourage them to farm. But if we discourage these people and continue really not being fair to the farmer, then nobody will want to associate themselves with farming, because there is no reward.
Yeah, thank you for that, Irene. I hope we have been able to answer your question. Dominic, are you there with us? Dominic Yakubu? Dominic, you can unmute your mic and ask the question. Maybe as we wait for Dominic, Sisiman, are you there with us?
Hello.
Mic? Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation. I want to know what is the correlationship between cash transfer assistance and food security, and is cash transfer assistance can be effectively contribute to tackle the roots of food insecurity? This is my question.
Okay, thank you for that question. So cash transfer is one of the interventions that I highlighted that can be used in an emergency, in cases where the markets are still functional and there is food in the market, but these people do not have the financial capability of buying the food. So cash transfer is used to boost the local market. That is, we are still supporting the local community, but we are helping those people who are food insecure in terms of not having enough money to be able to buy the food. So it's used in very special circumstances because it's also not sustainable in the long run. And it's mainly used in the vulnerable population who are not able to earn their own money economically. In most situations where I have found it being used, it's used to help the elderly, the aged, who can no longer be able to work, and therefore they need assistance. So this person, when they are elderly, they cannot really farm, they are retired or they are old and sickly. So the only way really to help them other than to bring them food is to give them cash. And to give them this cash allows them a bit of independence where they can still choose what they prefer. So the cash transfer programs are mainly used in very vulnerable populations, especially the elderly, and they are used for a short time, or if they're used for a long time in very special circumstances, because they are not very sustainable in the long term. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. We are still taking 2 more questions. We are still taking, you can also send the questions and feedback through the Q&A or through one of the emails as we shared on the screen before. Any other questions? We still have, the floor is still open for any question. You're also free to give us any feedback or just a comment on today's session. The floor is still open. Anthony, are you there with us? Anthony?
Hi, Eric.
Hello, Anthony.
Yeah, I can see we have one question. So let's try to pick the last one and then we can close the session.
Okay.
Okay.
Galaxy J7, I think you've not replaced your name. You can unmute your mic and ask your question and maybe also introduce yourself.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. I'm Eric.
Okay, Eric.
Yes. Sorry, I joined the webinar late a bit. I delayed a bit due to the circumstances of. I'm working as live UNHCR. So we're talking about food security and the other nutritional aspects. How can a person who is vulnerable can sustain his food security through his vulnerability situation? Over to you. Thank you.
Irene? Irene, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you for that question. So a vulnerable person, you're asking how they can sustain their food security status, how they can achieve food security. Well, that is where the humanitarian organizations come in, because a vulnerable person who is in an emergency has no coping mechanism on their own. So what we try to do as humanitarian organizations is to empower these people so that they can be able to what we say, help themselves, if that makes sense. So if you're a vulnerable person and you're in an emergency situation and you get things like business training from a humanitarian organization, and you get support in terms of financial or resources to set up a business, then you end up becoming food secure. So the only way to help a vulnerable person get food security when they're in an emergency is to empower them, either through education, through training, through giving them work opportunities, or involving them in self-empowerment projects. So they cannot, in most circumstances, they cannot be able to do much by themselves because they are already at a disadvantage. They do not have the resources. They are barely surviving. If it's in a crisis, they are depending on other people for food, for shelter, for medical assistance. So the only way is for humanitarian organizations who have empowerment projects to come in and take these people under their wing, give them training, give them resources, give them education so that they can be able to empower themselves.
Thank you for that, Irene. And with that, we'll come to the end of our session, and I'd like to invite Anthony back. Anthony, are you there with us?
Yeah, so thank you to all of our participants, and also for the facilitator for today, that is Irene, for the wonderful session. I know the time is not on our side, and we've gone really past time. We're sorry for the technical challenge that we faced earlier on. However, you can follow with us when it comes to further questions that you might have. Write us an email, text us on WhatsApp, reach out to us on the social media pages, that is on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and also on the WhatsApp. So thank you so much, and we're going to be sharing the recorded version of this class and also the slides with you. And without much ado, I think that's where, Eric, we end today. So thank you to all of our participants, and we look forward to having you on board for these courses. In case of any question on how to sign up, you can write us an email, you can text us on WhatsApp, and we're going to guide you further. So thank you so much, and may you have a great weekend.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Muchami. I am a consultant and also a trainer for Humanitarian Global. And my areas of competencies are diverse, basically in WASH, and also in project management and monitoring and evaluation. I'd had lengthy years of consultancy work with humanitarian organizations in the area of WASH projects, and that's basically what describes me. Yeah, in terms of efficiency, we can say that the program really was well organized, was well coordinated, and I think we managed to achieve a lot. Sometimes some sessions we could be run over by time because there is much to cover and the time sometimes is limiting. But interestingly, this is a program that we have essentially been able to cover everything that we intended to cover. When you look back at the training plan as it was, there's no single session that we have not covered adequately, as much as we had a lot of fruitful discussions within that coverage. So I can say the program was very, very efficient. Definitely, I think Humanitarian Global is an institution that applies global standards in terms of humanitarian training, and that is the reason why participants coming from different countries can actually be able to feel very, very comfortable to be able to come into Humanitarian Global, find global standards, find global knowledge, find global skills, and global tools and techniques to be able to help them apply their profession in diverse organizations. So I think the choice of Humanitarian Global is surely the best bet they can have for humanitarian training.
Okay, thank you.
I would say this was successful, and of course it was a very good opportunity to facilitate core for this particular training, and we are hopeful to be able to get more of his colleagues coming for further training, and again also even beyond training, consultancy opportunities as well with his organization, and I think that is something that we are looking forward to, and keep a long-lasting relationship.